Between higher prices in the grocery store and at the gas pump, and talk about the impact of inflation in the U.S., many people are concerned about how the current financial climate will affect them. David Spika from Guidestone is with us today on Baptist Press This Week to help us think through the financial pressure we are experiencing. Well, David, thanks for joining us for Baptist Press This Week.
You bet. Happy to be here.
I've heard you talk about the consumer stress indicator recently. What is that, and where are we in that stress indication level?
Well, the consumer stress indicator combines food prices with mortgage rates with gasoline prices. So effectively, it's the key things that consumers spend money on. And when you aggregate those, they come up with a measure. The measure today is 23, I believe. Importantly, though, this is as high as it has been since the early 1980s, the last time we had inflation this high. Ultimately, what this means is consumers are really stressed by the environment and don't have the income they need to meet all of their needs. They're spending all their money on food and energy and don't have the cash they need to make discretionary purchases.
Okay. So how long do you believe we'll be in this cycle when consumers will be feeling this stress?
Well, the inflation's the key. We're running at about 8.5% today. Again, that's the highest we've seen since the early 1980s, a long time ago. Historically, the way the Fed has fought inflation is by raising interest rates, by choking off economic growth. The Fed can't control the supply side of the equation. They can only control the demand side. And what that means is they have to hurt the consumers. Consumer spending is 70% of our economy. So by raising interest rates, they hurt consumer spending, which that stress indicator indicates they're doing. They reduce economic growth. And when demand falls, inflation falls. The bad news is this can take up to a year to really play out. So the Fed started raising rates back in March. It's probably going to be next March before we see a significant decline. The good news, though, is that we've already started to see mortgage rates come down a little bit. We have seen gasoline prices come down a little bit. All that should continue to occur. But just in terms of costs being above what consumers are used to, it could take up to a year.
Okay. So what are some things that individuals or families should be doing to ride out the stressful time?
I think it's a good time to practice some financial prudence. We live in a society where spending is not only something that people like to do, but they're basically encouraged to do it. As I said, 70% of our economy is consumer spending. So as the consumer goes, so goes the economy. But in an environment like this, it doesn't hurt to be a little prudent, to step back and say, you know what, do I need that new flat screen TV? Do I need that new car? No, I can live without that because I need to pay for food and gas. It's interesting, Walmart recently came out and said their earnings are not going to be as strong as expected because people are spending more money on staples like food and energy and not as much on discretionary items like clothing and electronics. And that's clearly what consumers are going to have to do. And so being somewhat prudent and not overextending yourself in this environment is probably a good strategy.
We've talked about home, we've talked about families. When we come back, we're going to ask you some questions, if it's okay, about the economy's effect on churches. And so we hope you'll stay with us. We'll be right back with questions that affect the church. Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week. Our guest is David Spika with Guidestone. David, we may have some pastors or church leaders watching right now. What are some suggestions you would give them as they begin to work on their annual budget for 2023?
Well, Brandon, let me preface this by saying I'm not a church finance expert. However, what I would suggest for anyone looking at budgets for next year is to leave yourself some cushion, leave yourself some wiggle room. We fully believe the economy is going to go into a recession. In fact, historically, that's the only way that inflation has been brought under control is through a recession. So if I'm looking at that, I'm going to be prudent. That means that I'm going to leave some wiggle room. I'm not going to commit myself to expenses that I absolutely have to incur in 2023. Now, if things turn out better than expected, then I can make those expenditures. However, I need to be sure that I have that cushion, that wiggle room, that if things do turn out to be difficult, I don't have to go in and start laying people off or making very, very deep cuts. So it's all about leaving yourself some cushion, leaving yourself the ability to pivot in the event things do turn out to be pretty bad.
Yeah, and that really leads into the next question I had, which was helping churches think about building projects, capital campaigns or programs, things like that. I mean, that, if at all possible, might fit into that cushion that you're talking about right there.
I think it does. I think that one of the things to recognize is we've gone through a period where real estate prices, building supplies, labor have all gotten extremely expensive. We're starting to see that reverse. With rising interest rates, there's less demand for homes, there's less demand for commercial property, raw land's going to become cheaper. Labor is going to start to become more available and less expensive, particularly if we go into a recession. So waiting some of that out is probably prudent. You wait another year or so, maybe things are cheaper. Maybe it's easier to get labor. Maybe the land you need to acquire is cheaper. The building supplies, we've already seen lumber come way down, copper's come way down. So these are things that if you wait a little bit, if you practice some patience, it might be better in a year, 6-9 months to a year, from a perspective of the cost to go ahead and initiate those capital expenditures at that time.
Okay. I'm going to ask a broad question. Every church is different in the way that they compensate their pastor. But maybe you can offer some advice that would help in a broad way. Are there things that a church can keep in mind when they think specifically about compensating their pastors during a financial season like this?
Well, I mean, the pastor obviously is key to the church and spreading the gospel and delivering the message to the people in the pews. So I think that the pastor's compensation has got to be something that is discussed first and foremost. If you're going to go in and you're going to make decisions that might be difficult decisions, I think you get that pastor compensation done first. And some of those other difficult decisions, maybe it's ancillary employees, maybe it's some of these capital expenditures around building plans, things of that nature. Those are things that you leave some wiggle room on. But I think you got to take care of your pastor.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would add, not just for churches, but for families and individuals as well?
I think one thing that people need to keep in mind is recessions are generally thought of as very difficult periods of time. People lose their jobs, stocks decline, et cetera, et cetera. But recessions are a normal and healthy part of the economic cycle. And we haven't had a real recession since 2008. They generally occur every 5 to 7 years. So we haven't had one in 14 years. We are overdue for a recession. The other thing to bear in mind is recessions can be very healthy. Just like you prune the shrubs in your yard so you can experience new growth, the economy needs to be pruned so it can experience new growth. What do we need to prune today? Inflation, housing prices, the very, very hot job market. All of these things need to be adjusted, need to be brought back into line, and that's what recessions can do. So if we get through this, if we have a relatively minor recession, inflation comes down, some of these excesses are worked out, that puts us in much better shape for the future.
Okay. Thank you so much for spending some time with us on Baptist Press this week. Thanks for watching Baptist Press this week. Make sure to subscribe to our Baptist Press YouTube channel, then click over to baptistpress.com. While you're there, make sure to sign up for our afternoon and morning emails so you can receive the latest from Baptist Press every day.